Under the able leadership of her captain, Jorgen Jorgensen, the Dictator was fully loaded with a heavy cargo of yellow pine. Other passengers besides the captain were his wife of 7 years, Joanna, their 3-year-old son, Carl, and a crew of 17. 2 weeks into her voyage, as the Dictator passed Grand Bahama, she was hit with a tremendous tropical storm. Riding low on the waves as a result of her heavy cargo, the Dictator became easy prey for the big foaming waves that washed over her deck, splintering her guardrail and washing it overboard. As the ship pitched and rolled heavily, the high waves smashed 2 of the Dictator's lifeboats, stripping them away from the davits and sweeping them into the raging seas. As the storm subsided, it had become clear that the aging vessel had sprung a leak. The crew manned the steam pumps, but they too had been damaged by the storm. The Dictator was in trouble, but Captain Jorgensen, having faced this kind of danger before, ordered the crew to repair the pumps. And when that was not possible, he ordered them to work the pumps manually. He was determined to reach West Hartlepool on time. But the weather was against the luckless Dictator and every other ship that sailed the South Atlantic that winter. Nature, it seemed, had unleashed her most violent fury as storm upon storm assaulted the eastern seaboard from the southern tip of Florida all the way to the coasts of New Jersey in the north. And then, on March 23rd, a hurricane from Bermuda with blinding rain, treacherous lightning, and fierce squalls moved toward the United States and directly into the path of the ill-fated Dictator. The Norwegian vessel, groaning and straining as powerful waves smashed her weakened hull, fought valiantly against the elements. Hurricane-force winds and ferocious waves spent their violence against the already battered and beaten vessel. The crew manned the steam pumps, but despite their best efforts, could not stem the flow of water coming into the leaking bark. The beleaguered ship was now taking on water at the rate of 2 inches per hour. The crew knew that they were fighting a losing battle. In fact, they were ominously aware of their peril. First Mate Cornelius Nielsen confronted Captain Jorgensen.
Sir, we cannot stop the leaks, and the men are tired from working the pumps. They have asked that we change course for a safe port in America.
Captain Jorgensen, who'd been on the quarterdeck virtually without sleep since the first storm hit the vessel, responded.
I am aware that the men are tired, myself included. Once this storm subsides, we can make adequate repairs. In the meantime, we will stay the course.
Oh, I must warn you, sir. This old ship is hurt. Badly, I sincerely doubt, sir, that we will make it safely to England without repairs.
I am aware of the damage, Mr. Nielsen, and the danger, and the deadline. We will stay the course.
Oh, there are murmurs, sir. Amongst the crew. Some of the men are refusing to work unless you go in for repairs.
Jorgensen frowned and pondered.
I see. Well then, Mr. Nielsen, tell the crew we are going into Hampton Roads in Virginia for repairs. We should find good facilities at Norfolk.
Jorgensen's command to seek repairs was met with enthusiasm by the crew. Even Joanna, who had felt the rising tension of hostility amongst the crew members, was relieved when he told her of his plan. In the early morning hours of March 27th, the bark Dictator lumbered into the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. The weather was rainy and thick, the seas tumultuous, and the tropical force storm winds ripped through the rigging. Captain Jorgensen sailed cautiously, but by dead reckoning, for several days now he had lost benefit of sun and stars for navigation. He believed himself to be in the vicinity of the Cape Charles lightship, but he believed wrongly. Unbeknownst to Jorgen, he was actually in the vicinity of False Cape, some 22 miles further south, and perilously close to shore. It was the duty of the leadsman to inform the captain of the water's depth, and that morning his calls were ominous.
By the deep! 10 fathoms, sir!
This signaled that the water they were in was only 60 feet deep.
By the deep! 6 fathoms, sir!
36 feet.
By the deep! 4 fathoms, sir!
24 feet, but before the captain could correct his course, he felt the keel of the Dictator scrape the bottom. Realizing the inevitable, Jorgensen turned the ship directly toward land in an attempt to get her as close to the beach as possible. The Dictator quivered visibly, and in a moment came to a solid standstill on the outer edge of a sandbar not 350 yards from this very shore. An anguished silence fell over the ship, and Jorgensen ruptured that silence.
Cut away the mainmast!
He snapped, in hopes of relieving the ship of her heavy topside. A sailor grabbed an axe, and with a heavy swoop, severed the lanyards and the rigging. Abetted by the violent wind, the mainmast snapped off just above the deck, taking the fore and mizzen topmast with it. The sails, their rigging, and the mast smashed the Dictator's 2 remaining lifeboats as they fell across the deck and over the side. This left one 16-foot sharp stern boat intact for their rescue. Jorgen retired to his cabin. There he found his wife trying to comfort their crying and frightened son. There, in the midst of the tumultuous seas, he knelt on the cabin floor and embraced them. "Oh, Jorgen," she cried. "God help us."
We have run hard aground, but I can see shore. Do not be afraid. Rescue cannot be far away. In the meantime, Joanna, put on one of my old suits. Your dress may be too cumbersome upon the slippery deck.
His true concern, however, was that her dress would be too cumbersome should she find herself swimming in the freezing March Atlantic Ocean. On shore, a surfman from the SeaTac life-saving station noticed the grounded ship, and by 10:45 a.m., the SeaTac life-saving crew, headed by keeper Edward Drinkwater, was getting set up on the beach. In those days, the primary mechanism for rescuing a shipwrecked crew was called a breeches buoy. It worked like this. A small cannon called a Lyle gun is loaded with a projectile with a rope attached to it. The gun is fired, and the projectile and rope are hurled over the bow of the ship. Once retrieved by the ship's crew, the line is pulled in from shore, where on the other end is a block and tackle assembly with a sturdy rope threaded through it. This assembly, once mounted to one of the ship's tall masts, created a continuous rope line from ship to shore. From there, the line operated much like a clothesline between tenement apartment buildings. With the rescue line secure, the life-saving crew would then deploy the buoy. This is a life ring, or a life preserver, if you will, with a big heavy pair of canvas breeches attached at the bottom, like a big pair of shorts. This breeches buoy is then threaded to the ship, where a member of the crew is settled into the breeches. Then, with help from the ship and the beach, the sailor is pulled to shore.
Ready the Lyle gun!
Snapped Drinkwater.
Number 7 line!
He waited for a break in the inland driving rain and finally gave the order.
On my mark! 3, 2, 1, fire!
They fired into the dead eye of the oncoming wind, and the projectile fell 30 yards short.
Try again!
Snapped Drinkwater.
Number 4 line!
This time, using the smallest line available, he gave the order.
On my mark! 3, 2, 1, fire!
The projectile whizzed toward the bark, but fell equally unsuccessful. By this time, a crowd had begun to gather, mostly guests from the oceanfront's newest and only hotel, the Princess Anne. Many of the guests were unaccustomed to the brutality that nature can inflict on men who make their living by sea. They were both mesmerized and horrified by the drama unfolding before them. We are told that some cried, others knelt in the sand and prayed, but most stood silently on the beach, watching what was becoming a literal struggle for life and death. It was around noon, and as Captain Drinkwater contemplated his next move, he noticed an empty barrel with a line attached to it being lowered over the side of the Dictator. The barrel floated toward shore, and Drinkwater ordered that the Lyle gun be loaded again, and that this time a line be fired across the barrel. On my mark! 3, 2, 1, fire! This time the projectile hit its mark, and in short order, the surfmen had pulled the barrel to shore, attached the block and tackle assembly to the barrel. The ship's crew pulled it back in against the surf and successfully mounted it to the starboard mizzen shroud. Captain Jorgensen selected seaman Jacob Mell to be the first to board the breech's buoy. He sent a signal to Drinkwater, who in turn ordered his men to begin hauling the sailor to shore. Pull! As the sailor and buoy were being pulled to shore, the pounding surf shifted the Dictator so that she was almost completely parallel to shore. As a result of the force of the waves, the ship began to rock back and forth like a giant pendulum. When the ship rocked away from the shore, the rescue line would suddenly become tight, launching the sailor and the buoy high into the air. When the ship rocked shoreward, the rescue line would suddenly go slack, plunging Seaman Mell into the icy and violent surf. The rescuemen tried to keep the line taut, but they could not compensate for the rolling action of the ship. It quickly became clear that this would not work, and to continue trying to do so would prove to be lethal. He was literally being beaten to death on the ocean's surface. The signal was given to haul Seaman Mell back to the ship. He was half drowned and nearly unconscious. The failure of the breech's buoy was a bitter disappointment to the crew of the Dictator. Captain Jorgensen then did the only thing left he could do. He ordered the ship's last remaining small boat to be launched. 4 men were told to get into that boat. The launching was made under the most difficult of circumstances. The wind was blowing ferociously. The air was thick with blinding rain, and the waves now began to lap onto the ship's deck as it rolled from the impact of the waves. It was almost 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Jorgensen had a line attached to the rear of the small boat. If they made it to shore, they were to tie it off at the front, so the boat could be pulled back and forth. Joanna and Carl were to be its next passengers. However, the boat capsized as it reached the shore's breakers, and the surfmen raced to rescue the nearly drowned crew members. Once the crew was on shore, Drinkwater and the bystanders learned for the first time that the ship they'd been watching was the Norwegian bark Dictator, and that among its passengers were the captain's wife and 3-year-old son. This information infuriated some of the bystanders, who began to wonder why Drinkwater hadn't launched his own life-saving boat. Well, Captain Drinkwater stood, staring at the stricken vessel, contemplating his next move. The wind-blown, biting rain stung his face as he measured the height and ferocity of the waves. Should he send out the surf boat? Should he put the lives of his own men at risk, when he knew that their chances of reaching the Dictator, indeed, their chances of even surviving the attempt, were minimal at best? Perhaps he should delay his decision and pray for an improvement in the weather. Well, Drinkwater made his decision. "We will not send out the surf boat. It is unsafe." His ruling sent a shockwave through the bystanders and the life-saving crew. One of them erupted. "Well, good God, man, there are living souls out there." Another added, "Well, it's your duty. You got to try." Still another, seemingly familiar with the unwritten code of the life-saving service, quoted it to him in front of the crowd. "You got to go out there, Drinkwater, but you don't have to come back." Support came from those familiar with the sea and the Virginia Beach coastal waters. It would be insane recklessness, near madness, to try to launch the boat against this surf. Many of the rescued Norwegian sailors pleaded with Drinkwater to be allowed to use the surf boat. When told of Jorgensen's plan to pull the boat back and forth through the surf, he responded saying, "Oh, the boat will be full of water by the time it leaves the beach.
It is simply impractical to do as your captain suggests.
Still, there was another option. Someone then suggested that the life car be sent out. The life car was like a small submarine with an iron hull and an airtight hatch. The life car could be pulled back and forth through the surf in the same manner that, that Jorgensen had suggested. Still, Drinkwater denied this as a possibility as well. He refuted this idea by saying,
"Oh, it would take 30 persons on either end to pull the life car through this surf."
It was now almost 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and the sun would soon begin to set. Drinkwater was running out of options, and fast. In a last-ditch effort, he decided to try the breeches buoy once more. He sent a signal to Jorgensen, who once again selected seaman Jacob Mell to board the buoy. If, he reasoned, he made it safely to shore this time, then Joanna and Carl could be next. He sent a signal back to Drinkwater, who once again ordered his men to begin hauling the sailor to safety. They strained every muscle to keep him out of the freezing surf as much as possible. And finally, he made it to shore. Encouraged, Jorgensen called to have Carl and Joanna brought topside. As they awaited the buoy's return, he comforted his frightened wife and crying son. "Oh, Jorgen," she said, "I'm so afraid." But before the buoy could be returned, a crewman noticed that the stern post, the massive beam at the rear center of the ship, had been wrung out of place by the surf, and the waves now began to wash into the hull.
"We're breaking up!"
He cried, and panic set in.
Joanna, you have to get into the buoy. We are breaking up.
"No," she said, I can't do it."
Do not be afraid. The buoy is working.
"No," she responded, "not without you, not without Carl."
We will be coming in right after you.
But as he tried to persuade her, a giant wave dashed over the deck, nearly sweeping them all into the sea. And as Jorgensen clutched desperately to his son, a sailor caught his wife as she slid across the deck and nearly over the side. The dictator's timbers groaned and cracked with every heave of the sea. The whitewater waves now crashed freely onto the ship's deck, causing the guardrail around the quarterdeck to crumble. The dictator was being beaten to pieces. The stern was gone, and the deck on which the remaining crew stood now slanted perilously toward the water. And with an ear-shattering crack, the vessel split in two, so that the forward part of the hull was almost completely submerged. And as darkness settled in around them, with the deck frame crunching apart beneath their feet, they failed to notice the returned buoy hanging just overhead, awaiting their deliverance. Death was coming to the dictator. Those still on board knew that the end was near, and as darkness enveloped the ship, all hope of outside rescue had been abandoned. Jorgensen decided to make one last attempt to save the life of his wife and son. He had saved the ship's ladder for this very moment. He explained to her how, if they tried, they could float together to shore on the ladder. Resigned to her fate, she responded, "Don't you think it's better that we stay here and die together?" Jorgen calmly explained that this was their last and only chance for survival. He lashed their son Carl to his breast, embraced his wife, and explained to her how he would dive in first, secure himself to the ladder, and then Seaman Baptiste would lower her down to him. Then with emotion, he choked out,
Joanna, you are the singular love of my life. And you always will be. We will make it to shore, together.
Jorgen dove in, but he missed the ladder, and it proved to be an elusive target in the pitching seas. Little Carl screamed as his father tried to keep his little head above the icy waterline. A wave swept the powerless captain away from the ladder and under the water. As he resurfaced, he caught a final, fleeting glimpse of his Joanna, kneeling on the deck, hands clasped in prayer. Little Carl, who had swallowed much water, coughed and moaned as his father tried to protect him from the floating and pitching wreckage. Another wave surged over Jorgen, forcing him down to the ocean's floor. And as he struggled to resurface a second time, he discovered, to his horror, that the child had been torn from his body. The frenzied captain now swam frantically, looking for his son, calling Carl's name. But Carl was gone. Jorgen caught and clung to a piece of wreckage that floated near him. And soon he found himself drifting onto a sandbank. Using the remainder of his strength, he crawled up the beach, just a few hundred yards north of the dictator's wreckage. Lying on the beach, the nearly unconscious captain collected his senses and stumbled toward an open fire he spotted on the beach. The rescue workers saw him approaching in the dark and ran to his aid. It was 8 p.m. on March 27th, Good Friday. From the warmth of the campfire, Captain Drinkwater and the men of the life-saving station listened in horror to the cracking timbers that verified the dictator's end. It was over. The wreck was total. The sea had won. Wood from the pine cargo and destroyed hull now lay strewn across the beach. The dictator, once a proud and gallant sailing vessel, was no more. Excuse me. None are more familiar with the hazards of seafaring than the people of the little towns and villages along the Norwegian coast. When a man is lost at sea, those in the north utter a laconic comment. Han ble, they say. He stayed. Those who stayed in the dictator tragedy were Joanna Pauline Jorgensen, her son, Carl Zealand, First Mate Cornelius Nielsen, Seaman Ole Olsen, Jean Baptiste, Andreas Isaacson, and Stuart St. Clair. Joanna's body washed ashore on March 29th, Easter Sunday. 1 week later, the body of their son, Carl Zealand, was found in the breakers near the Princess Anne Hotel. Both were interred at Elmwood Cemetery in Norfolk, where they remain to this day. Excuse me, are y'all still with me?
Yes.
Before we wrap up for the evening, a day after the shipwreck, S.E. Crittenden, the manager of the Princess Anne Hotel, noticed a large object in the rough surf. This object proved to be the dictator's figurehead, a woman of heroic proportions clad in a classical garment. Having been so moved by the preceding day's events, Crittenden had the object retrieved and mounted in the sands near what is now 16th Street and the ocean front. The figurehead faced the sea, a memorial to those who had perished. And there she stood for almost 60 years, when a combination of weather and vandalism forced her removal in 1953. Now with no physical evidence to remind them, all but a few soon forgot about the brave men of the dictator, their struggle, and their loss. That is until 1960. Thomas Baptist, a Washington attorney with a Virginia Beach summer cottage, took an interest in the old sea tragedy and the notion of restoring the figurehead. He wrote an article entitled "The Story of a Norwegian Lady," in which he recalled the tragic events I've just related to you. He closed saying, "As my daughters and I slowly walked up the beach, I could not but think how a tragedy of yesteryear had created sympathetic understanding between people who had never seen each other. How a wooden lady survivor of a bygone sea tragedy had become a symbol to perpetuate understanding and affect children born many generations after the tragedy. As a result of the Norwegian Ladies' Vigil on our Virginia coastline, Norway has always seemed closer to Virginia Beach than any other spot in America. City fathers, including the mayor, city manager, council, and townspeople alike would welcome a Norwegian sister to take her place. Baptist's article, published in a Norwegian newspaper, was met with almost immediate response. And in 1962, Ornolf Blast, one of Norway's leading sculptors, was commissioned to create a statue that would be an appropriate replacement to the dictator's figurehead. It was determined that 2 statues would be built. One would be mounted in Moss, Norway, the dictator's home port, and the other in Virginia Beach. The 2 would face each other across the ocean. And on September 2nd, 1962, the statue of the Norwegian lady was unveiled at 25th Street, directly in front of me. The towering 9-foot bronze statue is that of a comely young lady, clad in a vest and flowing dress of Norwegian tradition. Her left hand hangs limp at her side. Her right hand is bent, clasping a lock of her shoulder-length hair. And her eyes scan the horizon, looking longingly toward the sea. A plaque on her pedestal states her mission. I am the Norwegian lady. I stand here as my sister before me to wish all men of the sea a safe return home. Thank you very much. Thank you.